I'm Queenie and this is Deadly Dockets, where the court is in session and someone always bleeds before the verdict. In this series, we crack open the files nobody wanted reopened. The courthouse shootings that barely made the evening news, whispered about in break rooms, or left to gather dust in forgotten archives. Every episode, you'll hear the story from the inside. A survivor, a bystander, a loved one, or the one who pulled the trigger. These halls were built for justice. But some cases, they were built for blood. Episode 1. The door wasn't locked. Grayson County Courthouse, Texas, 2005. I knew he'd kill somebody the day the judge told him he couldn't see his daughter no more. People like to act shocked after it happens. Say things like, "He was always so polite," or "We never saw this coming." But I saw it. Every day. In the way he sat quiet at dinner, just staring through the wall behind me. The way he talked to himself when he thought I was asleep. The way he polished that 357 he kept in a red rag under the sink, like it was a family heirloom. We weren't even married when it happened. Hadn't been for a while. He'd tried to choke me in front of our girl once, and that was it for me. I filed the restraining order, packed a bag, and went to my sister's in Temple. Told the cops he was gonna lose it. That he had a gun, and no off switch. They wrote it down, put a little warning in the system. But the courthouse didn't have a metal detector. Not back then. Not in Sherman, Texas. They said it was a budget thing. Or maybe because it was just family court. Like the people who show up there aren't boiling under their skin. Like custody and child support cases don't end with funerals sometimes. That day, he wore the same faded jeans he always did. Steel toe boots, and a cap that said, "Get R done." He looked like every other man in the waiting area, like somebody you'd nod to in the grocery store parking lot. Except he had the revolver tucked behind his back, wedged in the waistband, barrel pointed straight at his own spine. He didn't speak when he came in, just stood real still in the hallway, watching his ex-wife talk to her new boyfriend. The boyfriend was laughing. That laugh probably echoed off the tile in his head for weeks. I wasn't there. I got the call 30 minutes later, but I remember what I said when I picked up the phone. "Is she dead?" That was the first thing out my mouth. Not what happened, or why are you calling me? Because deep down, I already knew what he'd done. There were 4 shots. First, the boyfriend. Shot once in the back, once in the chest. He didn't even turn around. Then a deputy tried to intervene. Bullet hit his arm. The last one was wild. Caught a woman who just finished her divorce paperwork and was walking past with a smile on her face. They say he meant to shoot the judge. That he came in angry at the whole system. But I don't think that's true. I think he wanted her to feel what he felt. Panic. The kind that lives in your lungs and never goes away. She'd moved on. Laughed again. That was the crime in his mind. I still remember how they described the hallway afterward. Blood smeared in arcs where people slipped. Papers scattered like fallen leaves. A baby crying in someone's arms because the mother had dropped her purse and ran. The bailiff shouting, voice cracking like he hadn't done it in years. And in the center of it all, him. Standing there, gun dangling at his side, like he wasn't sure what came next. He told me once, years back, that heartbreak ain't just an emotion. It's a disease. Eats away at your ribs, makes your hands twitch. When he heard she was bringing the boyfriend that morning, he felt it like food poisoning. Cold sweat, dry mouth, tunnel vision. That kind of pain makes a man feel like a ghost. Like he ain't even real unless someone else dies with him. They tackled him outside the courtroom. He dropped the gun like it burned him. Didn't fight, just sat on the tile floor and let the handcuffs bite into his wrists. They called it a courthouse disturbance, a troubled father who snapped. But that's not what happened. He planned it. He chose it. And when I finally saw him in prison, he told me why. Because the door wasn't locked. It still haunts me how easy it was. A man walks in looking like everybody else and walks out with blood that ain't his. That's the truth about these stories. It's not always the monster you see coming. It's the one you recognize in line at the gas station. The one who holds the door open for you and smiles. Episode 2, Bench Trial. The day the bailiff ran Van Nuys Courthouse, California, 1998. I was only 5 days into the job. Still so new, my ID badge felt like it belonged to somebody else. I kept forgetting courtroom numbers and scribbling them on the back of my hand. I was still learning the small rituals. Which judge liked silence in the elevator? Which one would make small talk about the Dodgers? And which bailiff carried mints for jurors? My shoes still hurt from standing too long, and my desk drawer was a graveyard of pens that barely worked. I took the job to pay down my law school loans. Figured I'd clerk for a year, get my references, then move on to a firm downtown where the biggest danger was spilling coffee on the wrong partner. But at 9:14 that Tuesday morning, all that planning got wiped out by a man whose left arm was wrapped in lies. His name was Richard. A name that sounded ordinary, almost friendly. The type of man you'd see at a grocery store, holding a shopping list his wife made. I'd seen him in the hallway before, slouched against the wall in frayed button-downs, eyes that seemed to catalog everything and everyone. But it's court. Most people look a little hollowed out by something. That morning, he sat at the back, near the exit, his left arm in a sling, a manila folder resting on his knee, and a case number pinned to his shirt like he was afraid to forget it. It was a family property dispute. Civil court. Nothing dramatic on paper. Nothing violent. When the judge entered, we all rose. That ritual always felt like the last moment the room was in balance. I set fresh notes on the bailiff's desk, and that's when I saw Richard breathing. Fast, shallow, like each breath cost him something. The plaintiff, his sister, began testifying. Her words came out clipped, as if she'd rehearsed them in front of a mirror too many times. Something about forged signatures, missing deeds, and betrayal. Richard didn't blink. He looked at her like a man staring through a window at rain. Then the judge asked him to speak. At first, he didn't move. Then slowly, deliberately, he stood. His voice cracked like old wood when he said, "I've been waiting a long time to say this." That's when he reached under the sling. The gun was small, a revolver, dark metal, the kind you could fit under a jacket sleeve or tuck in a tackle box. He unwrapped it from bandages with a calm that was worse than rage, like a man revealing the inevitable. The first shot caught his sister in the throat. Her words ended mid-sentence, replaced by a wet gasp. Blood painted the courtroom wall in a lazy arc before she collapsed sideways, eyes still searching for an explanation. The second shot was for his attorney, Mendez. He tried to move, but the bullet slammed into his shoulder, spinning him against the bench. Papers flew like startled birds. And then The moment I still taste in my nightmares. The bailiff ran. Didn't shout, didn't reach for his weapon. Just turned and bolted, shoving past a stenographer who stumbled into the jury box. His boots hammered on the tile floor, louder than the gun itself. The judge froze, her gavel clenched so tight her knuckles turned white. The room held its breath, waiting to see who would fall next. Richard didn't look at anyone else, didn't fire again. He stepped forward, laid the revolver gently on the defense table as if returning borrowed scissors, then sat. Crossed his legs, tucked his injured arm back into the sling. Like court was still in session. When a second bailiff finally arrived, the room had transformed into a crime scene. Blood pooling by the plaintiff's table, scattered papers stained red, the air heavy with cordite and shock. Sirens outside began their wail, late and useless. Later, they blamed it on a moment of madness, said Richard had mental health issues no one saw coming. But it wasn't madness, it was method. He'd studied us, filed motions to delay the trial until his preferred judge was scheduled, requested the left side seating to keep the gun hidden, wore layers to mask the shape of the revolver, and he exploited a loophole. Self-represented defendants in civil court didn't have to walk through metal detectors. That loophole cost a woman her voice and left a man bleeding on courtroom tiles. I stayed for 2 more months, jumping every time someone reached into a briefcase. Every rustle of paper felt like the next shot. The silence after the gunfire was worse than the gun itself. Thick, unnatural, a room full of people afraid to breathe. They replaced the bailiff quietly. No statement, no apology. Just a new face in the uniform, pretending nothing had happened. I went to Mendez's funeral. His mother hugged me, her hands shaking, and asked if I thought he'd suffered. I lied, said it was quick. I never went back to court after that. Now I write grants for a nonprofit, still around justice, but without benches that bleed. People sometimes ask if I miss the courtroom, the routine, the gravity. I tell them no. What I miss is not knowing what it sounds like when a courtroom screams. Episode 3, 12 Steps and a Trigger. Georgetown, Kentucky, 2009. He'd been clean for 8 months. 8 months of scraping skin off his own scars just to feel something like hope. I watched it all. Watched him slump into a folding chair at the back of our dusty church basement, palms damp, jaw tight, eyes never quite meeting anyone else's. The first few meetings, he didn't speak, just nodded at the confessions swirling around him like smoke. Then one night, he raised his hand. "My name's Aaron," he said, voice raw as gravel, "and I used to be a father." That was the crack in the wall he'd built. From there, the words trickled out, slow at first, then faster, until they spilled like floodwater. Stories about missed birthdays, about waking up in alleys, about a daughter's voice he hadn't heard in 3 Christmases. Every syllable seemed to cost him something. He found purpose in the ritual. Tuesday and Friday meetings. NA meetings squeezed in whenever his shift ended early. He swept floors after everyone left, scrubbed coffee stains off chipped folding tables, and made himself the quiet helper no one asked for, but everyone needed. I'd see him offer his last cigarette to a man whose hands shook worse than his own. And every time he touched that sobriety coin in his pocket, it was as if he was reminding himself he was still alive. I was his sponsor. The number he called at 2 a.m. when the nightmares came clawing. Sometimes we'd just breathe together on the phone, counting the seconds until his pulse slowed. I'd tell him recovery wasn't a straight road. He'd laugh, say his road had potholes the size of graves. He told me once, "The judge's courtroom is the last step for me." I thought he meant closure. I didn't see the shadow behind the words. What sent him there wasn't a fight about money, pride, or even reputation. It was about two small faces in an old photograph he carried like a relic, his son and daughter. Their eyes were his last anchor to the world. CPS reports had stacked against him over the years. Words like neglect and endangerment branded him beyond forgiveness. But he wasn't that man anymore. Not all the way. He stumbled, relapsed twice, each time he clawed his way back, sober breath by sober breath. But each slip was another black mark on his file. They didn't see the man in the folding chair, fighting ghosts most people wouldn't dare name out loud. They saw statistics, risk, a record. When the judge ordered him to live alone, no halfway house, no roommate, it might as well have been a sentence. Georgetown isn't a forgiving town for men with felonies. Landlords won't return your call. Jobs don't last. You end up sleeping in cars or roach-bitten motels that swallow half your paycheck. But the court wanted a clean address, a lease in his name, stability, proof he was something other than what his past had built him to be. The night before the hearing, he called me. His voice was brittle, like dry paper. "I'm tired, Q," he said. "I've done everything they asked. I don't know what else there is." I told him to hold on, that tomorrow might look different, but deep down, I heard it, the hollow echo of someone at the edge. The courthouse was quiet that morning. Frost on the windows, clerks clacking keyboards, lawyers murmuring into phones, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Just another Friday. Aaron walked in wearing a jacket too big for him, borrowed from a neighbor. Under it, the weight of something final. They said he was calm when he pulled the gun. 3 shots. One for the judge who'd already decided. One for the clerk whose only crime was typing the words that sealed his fate. One grazing a sheriff who lunged too late. I wasn't there. I heard through trembling phone calls at the noon meeting. Aaron. Courthouse. Gunshots. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and knowing, because part of me always knew. The papers called him a monster. Angry. Violent. They flattened him into a headline, erasing the trembling nights, the coffee-stained steps, the months of being the first to arrive and last to leave. They never saw the man who shook in church basements, who prayed silently before meetings started, who whispered his children's names like a rosary. When I visited him through glass, his jumpsuit hung off him like a punishment itself. His hands, once strong enough to lift others, wouldn't stop shaking. His eyes avoided mine until the silence swallowed us both. 12 steps saved me once, he finally whispered, voice thin as ash. But the trigger saved me that day. I didn't forgive the act, but I couldn't condemn the man, because I knew what it feels like to beg the world to see you differently, and watch it look right through you. Aaron got 40 years. Parole after 25. By then, the children he loved more than breath will be adults. The battle long buried. But I still write to him. And sometimes, late at night, I reread his letters and remember. The hardest fight isn't sobriety itself. It's proving you're no longer the man the world decided you are. Because sometimes the past waits, silent and heavy, with a trigger in its hand, daring you to prove it wrong. Episode 4. The quiet verdict. Jackson, Mississippi, 2011. He sat in the last row of the courtroom, so still and silent, he might have passed for part of the aging architecture itself. A shadow swallowed by cracked paint, and the solemn hum of ceiling fans fighting the August heat. If you glanced across the benches, your eyes might have skipped right over him, landing instead on the polished shoes of the prosecution, the dark robes of the judge, the sweating reporters scratching notes onto yellow pads. But I noticed him, because I had to. Because I was the only person in that room paid to see him as human. We'd prepared for weeks. Long evenings under flickering fluorescent lights, going over every piece of paper. Arrest reports, priors, affidavits, and letters from family swearing he wasn't the sum of his worst days. His crime was small, almost pitiful in scale. A car battery swiped from a grocery store lot because his sister's power bill was past due and the lights had gone out again. He hadn't even tried to sell it before the police caught him. He admitted it before they finished reading his rights. But in that courtroom, the charge wasn't just theft. It was every stumble he'd ever made since he was 15. Truancy when he skipped school to walk his little sister home. Loitering when he waited outside a gas station for a ride. Resisting arrest when he flinched as an officer grabbed his arm. They weren't just priors. They were a narrative, stitched together by the prosecution into something far darker. A man beyond saving. The judge, old, gray, spine like iron, barely glanced at the defense table. His reputation echoed louder than the clerk's gavel. No tolerance, no second chances. His bench was less a seat of deliberation than an executioner's block, and we both knew it. That morning, the courthouse felt different. The air was thick, humid, even indoors, clinging to skin and pooling behind collars. The benches creaked under the weight of family members whose eyes were red from sleepless nights. Onlookers, some curious, some vengeful, watched in silence that hummed louder than words. My client sat leaning forward, elbows digging into his knees, lips moving in a whispered litany. Maybe it was prayer, maybe the final rehearsal of last words. I couldn't tell. I wanted to lean over to say something comforting, but words felt brittle. What comfort can you offer someone who senses the door to his life about to slam shut? Then it came. The judge's voice cracked through the courtroom like a whip, cold, rehearsed, final. A sentence that weighed years heavier than the crime demanded, longer than even the prosecutor requested. The judge's gaze didn't flicker, his hand didn't tremble. Just a stamp sealing one man's fate, as if he were approving a zoning permit instead of stealing decades from a life. My client lifted his eyes, disbelief chasing tears to the corners. His voice was so small, I almost didn't hear it. This is wrong. And then, as though it had always been inevitable, he moved. From under that oversized coat, old denim, frayed at the sleeves, came a small handgun. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. The courtroom stilled into perfect, awful silence. Then came the thunder. 2 shots cracked like breaking bones. Wood splintered behind the bench. The judge flinched, clutching his shoulder, robes stained red. A third shot sliced past me, so close I felt the heat on my skin. My hand shot out. Reflex, panic, maybe hope. But it was too late. Chaos detonated around us. A scream rose from somewhere in the back. A bailiff's chair clattered to the floor. Reporters ducked behind benches, pens scattering like insects. Dust floated in the sunlight, cutting through the blinds. My client didn't move to run. He didn't curse or shout. He stood frozen, staring at the gun in his shaking hand as if seeing it for the first time. The gun clattered to the floor, echoing louder than any verdict. A deputy tackled him, face to marble, cuffs biting into wrists still trembling with adrenaline or regret. The judge survived. I did too. But something in that room died. Something unseen but deeply felt. No newspaper captured the quiet truth that no one thought to search him. Not because he'd earned trust, but because the system barely saw him at all. Poor, black, silent, too insignificant, they thought, to be dangerous. It wasn't mercy that let him in armed. It was neglect. Indifference so ordinary it passed unnoticed until the moment it shattered everything. They led him out in chains, his eyes vacant, lips moving in a prayer no one would hear. The floor was littered with broken glass, overturned chairs, and a silence so complete it pressed against your ribs. In that instant, the illusion of justice fractured. Not because of his violence, but because it revealed what had always been true, that this system listens only when forced. That desperation left unheard can harden into something explosive. Since that day, I carry the memory like a scar. The smell of gunpowder, the crash of splintered wood, and his last words, small and shaking, yet truer than any defense I could have offered. This is wrong. Because sometimes justice doesn't die quietly in back rooms and sealed files. Sometimes it dies right in front of us, loud, shocking, and still, somehow, we choose not to see. Episode 5, No Cameras in the Court, the Utah Family Feud. Salt Lake City, Utah, 2014. They say blood is thicker than water, but in my family, it was thinner than the dust that clung to our boots every time we walked that cursed land. A patch of scorched earth out past Hurricane Utah. Pale sand, scattered rocks, stubborn sagebrush scratching at your ankles. Nothing grew there but memories and resentments, and we harvested both by the truckload. It should have been a blessing. A gift from my grandparents, meant to keep the family tethered across years, across mistakes. But land has a way of turning family ties into tripwires. By the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, that place had stopped being a refuge and started to feel like a battlefield waiting for its first shot. As kids, we ran wild there. Shirts off, sunburned shoulders, dust in our teeth, and smoke in our hair from nighttime campfires. Grandpa would stand watch, boots planted like fence posts, telling stories of how his father first fenced off that rocky patch, swearing it would anchor the family for generations. Back then, it felt impossible that love could rot, that laughter could curdle into bitterness. The turning point came after Grandma died. Grief brought us together for a minute, long enough to take the photo for her obituary, then cracked us apart. In the cracks seeped years of old grudges. Who had sacrificed most? Who had been favored? Who had stolen what wasn't theirs? And Mason, our cousin, stepped right into that fracture. Mason could smile and curse in the same breath, the kind of man who turned confession into performance. You'd watch him and forget you were family. You'd think you were just part of his audience. By the time he filed the lawsuit, it felt less like a claim over dirt and more like a claim over us, to prove he had always been the real patriarch in waiting, the one wronged, the one overlooked. The fight bled through 3 Christmases, 2 Easters, and 1 family wedding, ruined by whispered insults and careful seating charts. Our attempts to patch things up fell apart like cheap tape on cracked drywall. The more we tried to salvage peace, the clearer it became that Mason didn't want peace. He wanted victory. The morning of the verdict, Salt Lake City was caught in that weird winter thaw. Patches of dirty snow melting into slush, the streets smelling faintly of salt and exhaust. The courthouse stood silent, its stone walls cold and unforgiving. Inside, the air felt stale, heavy with something no one would name. I wasn't meant to be there. I wasn't on the witness list, but I couldn't stay away. I found myself sitting outside the courtroom, the marble under me so polished it reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. My brother Jake sat across from me, dressed in his best suit, sleeves worn thin at the elbows, his tie knotted too tight. His eyes didn't lift once. I saw his chest rise and fall, each breath deliberate, as though he was rehearsing the moment he'd lose. They called them in. The door shut. The hallway swallowed the sound. All I had were muffled voices, the rustle of paper, the shuffle of shoes on tile. Every minute felt like an hour. I traced the cracks in the marble wall with my eyes, trying to will the outcome different. Then the door opened. People filed out, their faces drawn tight, some whispering under breaths they probably didn't know they were holding. Jake stepped through last. His face told me everything before words could. He didn't even look angry, just empty. The judge had given Mason everything. The land, the narrative, our history, rewritten by a man with a grudge and a good lawyer. You'd think scrubland wasn't worth it, but it wasn't the soil, it was what it stood for. The promise that family meant something even when everything else fell apart, and Mason had shattered it. Then came the sound that tore through time itself. 3 gunshots. Sharp, brutal, final. The air seemed to bend around them. Screams ricocheted off marble and wood. My legs moved before my mind caught up. The courtroom door banged against the wall, and there was Mason. Arm outstretched, gun still smoking, eyes flat as desert sky. Jake lay crumpled on the polished floor, blood seeping into stone, meant to look eternal. I remember my sister lunging forward, falling to her knees, palms pressed to Jake's chest, voice breaking on the word please. The bailiff tackled Mason, but Mason didn't fight. He simply placed the gun down as though finishing a chore. His calm was worse than rage, worse than regret. And in that moment, the courthouse, built to echo authority, to whisper of justice, felt like the most fragile place in the world. One thin hallway, a few bored glances from guards, and decades of hate had spilled into murder. They said there were no cameras to protect our dignity. But what dignity lived in that silence? What privacy mattered more than my brother's last breath? Mason pleaded guilty in record time. No drawn-out trial, no second act, just a quiet admission, a judge's gavel, and the cold bureaucratic sigh of case closed. The courthouse cleaned the blood, painted the walls, and kept its rules the same. No cameras, no real security, nothing learned. The land sits empty now, just dirt and ghosts. My sister moved away, trying to leave grief behind, but I stayed. Every time I pass that courthouse, the memory returns. The slap of footsteps on marble, the guns echo louder than anything I've ever heard, and the silence afterward, the heavy, horrible silence. They called it a family tragedy, but it was a tragedy born of blindness, a refusal to see that love can turn lethal, that family feuds don't always stop at words. Sometimes I wonder if anyone will ever truly learn. Because sometimes the fiercest fights don't happen in the open. Sometimes they happen behind closed doors, where silence isn't peace, it's pressure. And all it takes is one crack. Thanks for listening. I'm Queenie, and you've been part of Deadly Dockets. To my armchair detectives out there, if this story got under your skin, do me a favor. Share it with at least 5 people who love a chilling true crime deep dive. Hit that like button so more folks find their way here. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think could stop tragedies like these from happening again in our courthouses? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Don't forget to subscribe and keep the cases coming. Your support keeps this channel alive and helps uncover the stories that need to be told. Until next time, stay dangerously safe.